Okay, welcome to lesson 5 on Bohr diagrams for ions. Okay, let's begin. So Bohr diagrams for ions. Ions are basically atoms that have become charged because they've either lost or gained electrons. That's the basic idea. And we'll talk about why they lose or gain electrons in this lesson as well. The electrons in the outer shell of an atom are called valence electrons. Atoms gain or lose valence electrons in order to have a full outer shell, making the atom more stable. When the atom gains or loses electrons, the atom becomes charged overall and is called an ion. If the atom gains electrons, then that means it has more electrons than protons, so it has an overall negative charge. If the atom loses electrons, that means it has more protons than electrons, so it has an overall positive charge. So for example, we're going to draw a Bohr diagram for an ion of lithium. Step 1, we can start by drawing a Bohr diagram for a neutral atom. So we've learned how to do that in the last lesson. And there it is. So it has 3 electrons and 3 protons. So we say that it's neutral because it has an equal number of protons and electrons. Use the ion charge for the element on the periodic table to determine how many electrons the atom will gain or lose. Lithium has a charge of +1. +1 means that it loses 1 electron. Now that might seem counterintuitive because +1 seems like you're adding 1, but the +1 means that there's 1 more proton than electron. So it has an overall positive charge. Lithium has 1 extra proton because it lost an electron, giving it a charge of +1. So lithium loses the outer electron. And the reason why it does that is because the protons inside the nucleus are attracted to the electrons outside the nucleus. Opposite charges attract. Now, what happens is the nucleus is holding on to the electrons because of this opposite charge attraction. But this outer electron, the valence electron, is very hard to hold on to because it's so far away. So what the atom wants to do is it wants to lose that electron and give it away so that it doesn't have to deal with it anymore. So we remove the outer electron for lithium as well as the outer shell. So we erase it. You want to draw in pencil and use an eraser, and then we eliminate the outer shell. Then finally, the last step is we place brackets around the diagram and write the ion charge outside the brackets in the top right corner. So if lithium loses 1 electron, that means it has 3 protons, 3 positive charges, and 2 electrons, 2 negative charges. So it has 3 positive charges, 3 protons, and it has 2 negative charges. These 2 cancel out. This one cancels this one cancels this one, and now you're left over with 1 extra positive charge. So we draw brackets around lithium and we write 1 plus as the 1 extra positive charge. Example 2, we're going to draw a Bohr diagram for an oxygen ion. So we start with the atom first. So we draw the neutral atom. Oxygen has an overall charge of -2. Oxygen will gain 2 electrons in order to have a full outer shell. So nonmetals tend to gain electrons, and that's because they have usually 4 or more electrons in the outer shell, and the outer shell usually holds 8. And so what that means is it's easier for them to fill the outer shell and make it full rather than lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons. It's easier to just gain 2 and make a full outer shell. The whole point of ions is that they want to have a full outer shell. So nonmetals um, gain electrons because it's easier for them to do that. And metals lose electrons because it's easier for them to do that. So oxygen has a charge of -2. That means it gains 2 electrons. So we draw 2 extra electrons, and now it has a full outer shell, which makes the outer shell more stable, easier to hold on to, and so the atom is happier and it's going to stay as an ion. And now because it gained 2 electrons, it's going to have an overall charge of -2. Most nonmetals have 5, 6, 7, or 8 valence electrons. Thus, nonmetals tend to gain valence electrons to make a full outer shell. Metals usually have 1, 2, or 3 valence electrons, and so it's easier for them to lose 1, 2, or 3 electrons to have a full outer shell. Elements that have a full outer shell, such as the noble gases, will not form ions. This is why noble gases are non-reactive. Now try drawing Bohr diagrams for an ion of beryllium and nitrogen. At this point, pause the video and give it a try. Okay, here is the ion for beryllium. If you've done it correctly, that means you've understood how to draw Bohr diagrams for ions of metals. And here is an ion for nitrogen. If you've done this correctly, then you've understood how to draw Bohr diagrams for ions of nonmetals, and you're ready to move on to the practice questions. If you got these incorrect, then you might need to review the video or ask Mr. Johal for extra help.